Hi, I'm Lesha Buchak, Pharma Editor at MM+M, and I'm excited to be part of today's conversation in partnership with Flying House Media. Here with me today is Jason Ballou, CEO of Flying House Media. In a world of checklist-driven marketing, too often patient stories are reduced to a sequence of symptoms to solutions, and we often miss the person behind the diagnosis. Jason Ballou is a former producer for Oprah Winfrey, and he's spent 20 years interviewing people about some of the most difficult moments of their lives. Today, he'll share how curiosity, emotional safety, and storytelling can elevate patient content from educational to unforgettable, and why symptoms are not the story. This is Symptoms Are Not the Story, how curiosity, safety, and storytelling can transform patient content. Jason, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
So much brand and content today in the pharma space, as I mentioned, reduces patients to this sequence of diagnosis to treatment to resolution. But what's the problem with this, and why does this fall short when it comes to storytelling?
I think the main problem that we see, and we see it all the time, is that this reduces people to their symptoms or to their timeline. And it misses out on what's most important and what connects all of us, and that's our humanity. So when we sit down with a patient just to simply hear how their symptoms started, how long it took them to get diagnosed, what the resolution was, we've missed out on all those little parts that make them who they are. We've missed out on the heart of not just what a symptom is, but how a symptom impacts them, what the symptom takes away from them. One thing that we talk about all the time is that, when we work with stories, particularly in rare disease, very few people can relate to what a life with a rare disease is like. But what everybody can relate to is being a mother, a father, a brother, a sister, a husband, a wife. So when we take those things out of a story, we've missed that kind of emotional resonance that we can get when we actually take the time to understand who a person is and now share their story and let the audience kind of see a little bit of themselves in them when they watch it.
Jason, your experience producing for Oprah Winfrey has undoubtedly shaped your experience in interviewing patients and telling their stories. How has that experience informed and positioned you to better tell patient stories and kind of reach that emotional resonance that you were just talking about?
I mean, simply put, for over 11 years, I got to learn under the very best to ever do it. And so that is always going to be helpful. And I don't think I realized how much I was learning until long after I had left. But I think when I boil it down to what made Oprah so great is that she always showed up fully. She was fully present in every conversation she had. So she was not somebody who would just approach somebody with a newspaper headline and say, tell us this story and take us through the events. She was the person who showed up and asked what these things meant to them. She asked the questions that nobody else asked. And I think what really contributed to that is we spent so much time researching. So when I first started at Oprah, I was in the research department. And it was there at that ground floor that I learned how much work truly goes into understanding who someone is, so that when Oprah showed up, she knew their story better than they knew it themselves. And now she could just be fully present in that moment and kind of open up a space to be vulnerable. And I think that's the part that I took the most from it, is that when we sit somebody down in front of all these lights and cameras and strangers and an audience of people and ask them to share the details of the hardest moments of their life, we can't just tell them to be authentic. We can't tell them to be vulnerable. We have to create a space that welcomes that, and it starts by being fully present. So I think what we really take with us in everything we do is putting that work in ahead of time to make sure we can be fully present, so that we can ask those questions that we're curious about. And what that lends itself to is trust. And I think when we talk about marketing content, brand trust is everything. But that trust starts long before you hit roll on the cameras. It starts with that audience of one, that person that I'm sitting across from. So when they see that I'm fully engaged and I'm not looking at a list of questions, instead I'm looking at them and I'm asking things that I'm curious about, that's what really opens them up to say, I feel safe in this place. And now I can kind of reveal those things that maybe otherwise I wouldn't. And so the same thing can really happen when we create marketing content. I think so often we're looking so far ahead at the scope and the brief and the objective, but it really has to start so long before that. Who is this person that we're asking to share something with? And making them realize that they're not here for us, but instead we're here for them. And so one thing I always say is, if I work off a list of questions, I'm just showing up. But if I lead with curiosity, that's when the story shows up. And I think all of that comes from just my experience watching the very best in the business do it and the amount of effort it took our team to put her in that place.
I'm curious if you have any examples of maybe interviews that you watched or produced with Oprah that really stick in your mind that, really captured everything that you're talking about and that kind of you still think about.
Yeah. This is a story that my team is probably tired of hearing, but it's my very first ever interview with Oprah. I was a young producer who got my first assignment, and I just assumed it was going to be something kind of surface level, simple, and instead it was the story of a mother and father who lost all three of their children in a car accident. And so I remember getting that assignment, and in that moment, just all the imposter syndrome thoughts coming in and feeling like I was in over my head and just kind of lost, not sure what I was going to do. And one of my mentors, Brian, who worked there, just kind of sat me down and said, remember what your job is. It's to know the story better than they know it themselves so that you can just focus on being connected, everything I was just talking about. So I ended up spending the next 2 weeks reading every article I could about their story, talking to them on the phone and pre-interviewing them, going to Barnes & Noble and researching grief in parenthood and what that means and really fully immersing myself in what they might be going through. At the same time, I was a new father. I just had a daughter who was at this point 1 year old. And so this story just started to resonate with me more and more and get deeper and deeper. So by the time I showed up on set and sat down with them, I was already in this like kind of emotional place that I wasn't sure even how I was going to get the words out because it was hitting me really hard. But as soon as that conversation started, I was able to take that list of questions I had and just crumple it up and throw it away and just be fully present. And in the end, I was crying so hard at the very end of the interview that they offered me the last tissue in the box, which I refused. I could not live with myself taking that last tissue. But it's the most profound moment in my career and one of the most profound moments in my life because, yes, we got a great story out of it, but it taught me something about really the importance of what we can do when we sit down and truly listen to somebody. It was a therapeutic experience for them, but it was a life-changing moment for me.
Wow, that's really powerful. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
And I think so much of that can be translated to, marketers interviewing patients and reaching that emotional resonance. And, it seems like creating that emotional safe space and that vulnerability is a prerequisite for this. Do you have sort of best practices for marketers to employ as they try to create that emotional safety?
Yeah, it starts, again, long before you get on the set. One thing that my team and I always do is we do an empathy practice. So when we are assigned a story with somebody, the very first thing we do is understand what condition they may be living with and who this person is. What part of life are they in? Do they have children? Are they married? And then before we get into the actual creative brief, we'll all sit down and we will discuss what something like this could mean. If, my team has people with children, we have people that are younger and unmarried. We kind of run the gamut on our staff. So it allows us to sit down and empathize in different ways from different perspectives. So, it's really digging back into those experiences of our own, but also experiences we've had with other patients we've had on camera. If they're living with a similar disease state to the person we're about to interview, we can kind of think back to how it impacted them. And now take those same moments and place it into this person's life. How might it impact their daily life? So it starts there because what it does is it brings your whole team together, crew, agency, client, everybody together and understand that this is a person on camera. And from there, everybody just kind of handles themselves a little differently. Once you do get on set with somebody, you'll immediately see that they're very nervous. I mean, I'm nervous being on camera right now, and I do this every day for a living. So you can only imagine somebody who's never done it before, who's about to bare their soul in front of a bunch of strangers. So we just make sure that the crew is not immediately, getting up in their face and getting them ready for camera, but instead connecting with them, having a coffee with them, getting to know them a little bit, kind of breaking down that barrier to let them know that we're not special. What we're doing is not special, but how we do it can be. And that's by kind of creating that environment where, you're not here to perform, we're here to learn from you. And so it's just taking those gentle touches to make somebody feel at home no matter where they are.
And there's actually neuroscience behind everything that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Your team has actually worked with neuroscientists and experts in compassionate care to basically learn more about the link between storytelling and the brain.
Yeah.
What insights have you learned from working with neuroscientists on this?
Yeah, I think it's an important distinction to note that I am not a neuroscientist myself, but it really does fascinate me the way the human brain works and how it does connect all of us. So we have sat down with a lot of neuroscientists and experts in this field to get better at what we do, and what we learned. I think the most important parts that we learned, first, neural coupling. So neural coupling is this activity where our brains actually sync up. If you were to tell me a story and I lose myself in it, my brain activity will start to mirror yours as if I'm experiencing that moment myself. There's also the mirror neuron system, which is if you ever watch a video and you see somebody crying and you feel yourself kind of tearing up as well, that's your mirror neuron system firing. And it basically is just emulating whatever the other person is feeling as if you're feeling it yourself as well. I think the most important part for marketers is we talk so often about attention spans and how much shorter they're getting day by day. But when we create emotionally resonant content, studies actually show that attention spans increase by 2 times if it's truly emotionally connecting content. So I think it's understanding all of those things helps us realize that you can't get to that place of neural coupling, you can't get to that emotionally resonant place by simply having somebody list off a series of symptoms. Because in the end, the symptoms aren't the story. They're a part of the story, but it's how it impacts them that the true story is where the true story lives. So I think when you take those neuroscientific studies into effect, you start to understand how important this role is. You could put anybody in a chair and have them ask a series of questions, but if you put the right person in the chair who's truly invested, who's genuinely curious, you're building trust with the person across from you, you're connecting with the person across from you, and in turn, their story connects with the audience.
And if you were to distill everything that you've just talked about into some key takeaways for healthcare marketers, what would those be?
I think the number one thing that we always try and share with people is to not save this kind of storytelling just for the video. Don't just save it for your creative brief, but make it a part of your entire brand. Have your patients become people that your team is working for. So it's bringing a person's story to life, not just on the camera, but in everything that you do. Making sure that people are doing those emotional exercises to become more empathetic to what they're doing. Have conversations even with compliance to help them understand that these are people on camera. It's really just making sure that everything you approach is from a human perspective to connect us, rather than just reaching the goals on your brief. So, one of the clients that we work with has photos of their patients across their entire building and their names and who they are, and they do not list what their condition is, what their symptoms are, any of that. They list what their name is and if they're a mother or a father, a brother, sister. And I think the importance of that is every day when people walk in, they see that as my purpose. That's the person that I'm working for today is Rose, who's a mother of 2, and what that allows them to do is approach everything a little differently. And I would say that so often what I'll see when we first start on a project is there's a campaign that's created, and we're trying to see how can we fit a patient into that campaign. But why don't we first see who is this person that we're talking to, and how do we build a campaign around them? Let the people become the nucleus of everything you do, and you will make this content that's emotionally resonant.
How do you go about creating a vulnerable and emotionally safe space on set?
I think it's important to know that when you're on set, it takes the entire team to create a space that's welcoming and safe, but it only takes one person to have it all come crashing down. So I think it all starts with level setting at the very top, where if every single person that's involved in this project, whether it's the crew, the client, the agency, they all understand that this is a very uncomfortable situation for our subject to be in, our patient to be in, and we're going to treat it as such. And we approach that with hospitality. It goes beyond simply saying, I want this to be authentic and conversational. When you tell somebody that, it doesn't mean anything. I can't suddenly hit an authenticity button and feel comfortable. So it's making sure that when your audio engineer is putting a mic on, it's not an awkward in-your-face moment. It's it's very welcoming. There's jokes and there's laughter. It's my DP Josh has this great self-deprecating sense of humor because he knows how intimidating it can be for somebody to work with a cameraman, and he wants them to know there's nothing special about what I'm doing. I'm just a dad who's doing a job today, and we're here for you. So I think it takes going through and meeting with every single person that you're working with to let them know the weight of this situation that creates kind of a different environment. It creates a different kind of air around the set where eventually if you lose yourself in this conversation, the lights start to melt away, the cameras start to melt away, and now the crew that you're working with, they don't seem like a bunch of strangers. They seem like friends that you get to work with. And so I think it's just acknowledging the situation and making sure that every single person on set is a part of it.
And you've highlighted that to kind of reach that authentic storytelling, it's really important to listen to the person in front of you rather than having a checklist of questions or prerequisites. Mm-hmm. And this was obviously something that Oprah was great at. Mm-hmm. How do you go about pulling those powerful stories out of people while you're listening to them?
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into active listening. And I think people often forget the difference between hearing and listening. And truthfully, like I said, that the work you do ahead of time will always set you up for success. But I think what you kind of release yourself to is the story will reveal itself if you give it the space to. So the best question to ask isn't the next one on your list. It's the one that comes from the answer they just gave you. So it's kind of allowing yourself to lose yourself in what they're telling you and find these little emotional moments where maybe I saw them get a little emotional while they were talking about something. Even if it was at the beginning of their answer, I can revisit it and say, I saw you get a little emotional. Why does that impact you so much? It's really just giving yourself, it may sound cheesy, but the story becomes a living, breathing thing all of its own when you truly release yourself to it. And so if you just follow those cues and you follow the story, you're going to get everything you need. So really, it always comes down to just kind of giving yourself to the story and reacting to the person sitting across from you instead of thinking, what's the next soundbite that I need? And the way our team approaches that is always looking at a story in two different ways. You can tell a story based on a symptomatic timeline or a diagnostic journey where you talk about the symptoms they're experiencing, the pain they're having, how long it takes them to get a diagnosis. Was there a misdiagnosis along the way? But now if you strip all those things away, what are you left with? Nothing. But now if I talk about, there was a patient named Brian who, when he was 8 years old, suddenly woke up one morning and wasn't able to get out of bed. He had to miss baseball practice that morning because the pain in his feet and his ankles were so severe. There was inflammation and heat radiating from his body. And over the course of the next several years, the flares got worse and worse until he had to leave the baseball team. He missed more school than he attended. His parents searched for answers, took him to doctor after doctor after doctor, and they couldn't find an answer. And all he wanted to do was just be a normal kid to go and play baseball, to go hiking, to play golf with his friends. But he couldn't. So while they were all out living life, he was in bed crying himself to sleep. And it wasn't until 8 years later that finally a rheumatologist found an answer for him and diagnosed him with a disease that nobody expected him to have at that point. And now he's on this treatment journey that's giving him those little pieces of his life back. So when we take away the symptoms from that story, what we're left with is a scared little boy who just wants to be like everybody else, a mother who will do anything to help her kid. And you've got a heart of a story because what you're left with is a person. So I think if we are always looking at things from that angle of I first need to know who the person is before I care what they've gone through, that's where you start to really pull stories out of people.
Jason, thank you so much for joining and for sharing your expertise and your personal experiences. These are some really key insights for healthcare marketers. It's going to be very valuable for them as they seek to elevate their patient content.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
If you have any questions or thoughts for Jason, feel free to email him at jason@flyinghousemedia.com. Thanks so much for joining us today.